right, welcome back into the Zach Gelb Show right here on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. Today I was reading an article online with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the headline was Phillies owner John Middleton is ready for his team to start winning again. I think we are close. That's what John Middleton said to Mike Sielski, and it's very fitting that we have Mike Sielski from the Philadelphia Inquirer on today because it is the holiday season. Whenever it is the holiday season, I always think of the very giving Mike Sielski, who's kind enough to join us right now. Mike, appreciate a few minutes. Thanks for the time, and how are you?
Have I ever given you anything, Zach?
You've given me your time and probably a lot of arguments over the years.
Probably.
Well, Mike Sielski for the Philadelphia Inquirer with us. First, let's start off with the Carlos Santana move because it came to a surprise from me when they made this move. I was surprised by it. I don't love the move. I don't hate the move. But I will say this, Santana's someone that gets on base and does have a lot of pop in his bat. What was your reaction when they got Carlos Santana?
I mean, I was surprised, too, if for no other reason than the public position of the Phillies, for basically the last year had been we're going to let these young guys grow, and we're in no rush yet to kind of, put the gas pedal to the floor of the car and start this, this rebuild into overdrive. And by going out and really kind of paying a premium price, even overpaying for Santana, over a 3-year contract, they said, no, we're ready to start moving this thing forward now. And, yesterday at that press conference after they introduced Santana, I wanted to talk to Middleton about this because I suspected that he had a little something to do with this. And he did in so many words, I guess. I think the organization as a whole looked at this and said, look, the owner has made no secret of the fact that while he understands the steps that need to be taken to rebuild the Phillies, that he wants to win, and he wants to win as soon as possible, all things being equal. And they saw an opportunity within the National League East that once Giancarlo Stanton gets traded from the Marlins and once the Braves are punished by Major League Baseball by having their farm system and front office gutted because they violated the rules of international signing and player acquisition and contracts. And once the Mets show that they're not going to spend money, that there's an opportunity here for the Phillies if they make a couple strategic moves. And I think this was part of that, and I think the owner likes it. I think, Santana fit the mold of a player that GM Matt Klentak would want to sign, and so they went ahead and did it.
I'll tell you, and we always know Middleton, and he made it clear in his article, he's never afraid to spend, and he's voiced that opinion very publicly throughout the years, which is a good thing to have in an owner because you could look at the Mets situation in the NL East, and those clowns, the Wilpons, they never spend anything anymore. So let me ask you this, because I would laugh at the notion that the Phillies are close, but when you first said it, but you bring up a good point with the NL East, and it really seems like they're not that far off, maybe down the road. No one expects them to compete this year, but how close do you think they actually are, Mike?
I think it depends on what they do to improve their starting pitching. I think you were there yesterday and you heard, Klentak in particular talk about this idea that, well, we don't have to move any of these outfielders that we have. We can juggle the lineup and keep these guys happy. I think that's let me put it this way. I am significantly skeptical of that, and I think that now that they have this surplus of outfielders, if you write Rhys Hoskins' name in left field in pen, then you have 3 other outfielders for 2 other spots. You have Nick Williams, you have Aaron Altair, and you have Odubel Herrera. Any one of whom I think at this point is a possible trade candidate. And if you package one of those guys, maybe with a Maikel Franco, maybe with a Cesar Hernandez, depending on what the package looks like, you can get yourself a pretty decent starting pitcher, maybe more than one starting pitcher, depending, again, on how much you're willing to give up. And that's essential. They have to get somebody. And Middleton actually, to me, mentioned both Chris Archer and Garrett Cole. They are being upfront, really, for all the kind of smoke screening that Klentak did yesterday. Middleton, at least, is being upfront about the desire to go get a starting pitcher. And until they do that, I don't think we can take them quite as seriously as a contender in the National League East.
In your opinion, why didn't they just put Rhys Hoskins at first base and not sign Santana?
Well, because I think, I don't know this for certain, but I'm guessing on the way Klentak looked at the free agent market and the way it was shaking out, that they prize on-base percentage and, extra base power so much and they saw that Hoskins could play a decent left field last year in the relatively small amount of time that he did, that they said to themselves, okay, we can stick with Hoskins at first base and not sign Santana, or we can sign Santana, give Hoskins, kind of quote-unquote roll the dice with him in left field, and then you've got two disciplined power bats in the middle of the lineup, or even at the top of the lineup, depending on where Santana might hit. So I think they looked at it that way and said, okay, if we can have another one of these guys, let's go after him. And if it means putting Rhys Hoskins in his secondary position in left field, then we can live with that because we think he's going to produce at a level that would counteract or counterbalance whatever liability he may or may not be defensively in left field.
I know Tommy Joseph doesn't have much of a trade value, but they were talking yesterday about having the possibility of two right-handed first basemen and two left-handed first basemen as well. Obviously, Santana, switch hitter, Hoskins, the right-hander, and Joseph, the left-hander. With Tommy Joseph, do they move him before the start of the season? Because other than that, he's just a bench player for this team this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to be anything more than that. I think they would like to move him. He's been a good soldier. He's been a relatively productive player. Nothing much beyond the average or the mean. And so I think that if they could move him, they would. But they may not be able to. They may just have to say, we're going to designate you for assignment, move on from you because they've got. Isn't this always the Phillies' problem? They have too many good players, and so I'm not sure Joseph is part of their long-term future.
Mike Sielski with us right now on the David Lerner Associates hotline from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Manny Machado, it's a tough situation because it seems like he wants to move to shortstop, and then he's also not willing to sign an extension. So I don't know how much you want to risk to give up, even though clearly he's young at 25 and a great talent. But without having that assurance that he's going to stay around, it's a tough move to make. Where do you think Machado ends up?
That's a really good question, and I'm not 100% sure. We were talking about this amongst ourselves, some of the writers yesterday, and I think the calculation that the Phillies or any team has to make when it comes to Machado is this. The conventional wisdom has been that Machado was not going to agree to a trade between now and free agency next year, that any team that wanted to get him was going to have to bid on him in the offseason of 2018. The problem with that calculation, at least from the teams that would be bidding for him from their standpoint, is that there are so many teams now positioned to go after him. Look at what the moves that the Dodgers made, for instance, to clear salary, clear some of their space off their books so that they can make a play for either him or Bryce Harper next year. That I wonder if there were a way for a team like the Phillies to make a trade for him now, knowing that he would agree to sign long-term with them if they traded for him. I wonder if that's an avenue that they have to pursue. What it would take to make that kind of deal, I'm not sure. I think it would have to depend on the way the first few months of the 2018 season played out. Who shows that he is a mainstay in the lineup? Is J.P. Crawford the answer at shortstop? Is Michael Franco, if he's still on the roster by then, improved? Is Cesar Hernandez still the player he was? Where do things stand with Scott Kingery? There are a lot of balls in the air in that regard, and I'm not sure that it's easy to predict at this point where Machado would end up and what kind of push the Phillies would make for him right now.
I don't know where he's going to end up this year, but if he does stay the course and stick to the plan and say, hey, I'm not going to sign until next year, I just have a feeling, and I would hate to see it happen because they're already loaded, but I have a feeling he ends up with the Yankees. I really do, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, look, this is what the Yankees do. This is the luxury you have of being both, the biggest spender and having the biggest budget of any team in Major League Baseball, or at least close to it, and then, being able to produce prospects that you can flip for trades. The idea of Machado, Giancarlo Stanton, and Aaron Judge in the middle of the lineup would just be, that would be in some ways awe-inspiring and in other ways just kind of depressing to the rest of baseball.
It would be a lot of prodigious home runs. Let's just say if Machado wakes up tomorrow and says, you know what, I'm going to sign an extension if a team's willing to trade for me and bring me in. In that case, if he was willing to sign the extension, and clearly Middleton would throw the money at him, is there anyone in the Phillies organization that you look for in a trade that you say is untouchable right now?
That's a really good question. I would think the one pitching prospect, Sixto Sanchez, would be pretty close to it. There's scuttlebutt that he could pitch in the majors now, heading into this season. Now, they're not going to do that. The Phillies aren't going to. He's going to be a Double-A, I would think, and maybe, certainly a Triple-A by the end of the year if all goes well. But he would be the one guy. I would think Kingery might be the other guy, too. They are so high on him that I would think they'd be very reluctant to give him up in any deal for any player.
I talked to a lot of fans, and a lot of the fans, when I asked them that question, they mentioned the two names, and then another one, they throw in J.P. Crawford as well. If you could get a Manny Machado, because this guy's 25 years old, and I like Kingery a lot. Crawford, I need to see more of him because of the up-and-down season he had last year. I'd be willing to give up a Crawford or a Kingery, even though I like Kingery a lot, because you're getting a 25-year-old player who's really darn good in this game.
Yeah, I think it depends on, again, as we talked about, how do things shake out during the course of the season. If Maikel Franco finds his swing again and is the 800-plus OPS hitter that he was 2 years ago, that's one thing. If he remains, the least productive offensive and worst defensive third baseman in Major League Baseball, that's something else entirely. And then you have to gauge where does that factor into Machado's thinking. Would he play third base? How much would it cost to have him play third base? All that kind of stuff. If Cesar Hernandez takes a step forward and is hitting 330 and, hitting doubles and triples all over the place, that's one thing. If he's not, and Kingery's tearing the cover off the ball at AAA, that's something else. So, I think it's a little early yet to wonder what exactly it would take to get Machado in a trade, because there's still the matter of cream rising to the top for the Phillies over the first few months of 2018.
Mike Sielski with us from the Philadelphia Inquirer. All right, let's squeeze in a few points on the Sixers. Adrian Wojnarowski had the report the other day that Joel Embiid may miss these 2 games up against the Raptors, which means he would not return until Monday up against the Knicks on Christmas Day. The Sixers have him listed as questionable for tonight. You know it and I know it. If the Sixers wait till 6 p.m. to announce that Joel Embiid is out for tonight's game, here comes the deceiving the fans once again conversation, which is fair to bring up.
It's absolutely fair to bring up. And we're getting to the point here where, now that they are a legitimate basketball team, the attempts that they make time and time again to gin up people's expectations are getting harder and harder to justify, because we're starting to see more and more what they actually are. It's one thing when you can say, hey, come on board. We've got Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and they've played a total of 30 games together, and Ben Simmons hasn't seen any action in the NBA at all. It's another thing now that you see what the team looks like without Joel Embiid, and the stark difference between, even with the acquisitions that they made in the offseason and Simmons' presence, that they're not a very good team without Embiid. You see that Ben Simmons doesn't want to take a shot that's more than 6 feet from the basket, and it frustrates people. And that's the concern, I think, for the Sixers now, is that how much of this is about basketball? That's the thing that people forget. I think those people who were against the process kind of lump the entire Sixers organization into the whole, they tanked, and therefore I don't want to see them win, and they deserve to lose, and all that kind of stuff. The fact is this, that there was a schism in that organization, I believe, based on people I've talked to, between somebody like a Sam Hinkie and somebody like a Scott O'Neill, the CEO. The Sixers are so marketing-driven, and I think Hinkie was not that way at all. He was willing to tear the whole thing down and try to build it back up again, because he thought from a logical and from a basketball standpoint it was the right thing to do. I mean, you're talking about a general manager who traded Michael Carter-Williams 2 weeks after the Sixers basically created and began a marketing campaign around him. So this guy was not paying any attention to what, the business side of things was doing. And if he was, he didn't care. I wonder now if that's still happening, if they are, as you said, kind of stringing people along just for the sake of keeping them interested. And then, as you said, dropping the bombshell an hour before the game that, oh, sorry, Joel Embiid is going to play it.
And you get those fans in the seats. Does Markelle Fultz play this year? Because that's another one that you keep on hearing, they'll reevaluate him in 3 weeks. You reevaluate him in 3 weeks. And eventually we'll look at the calendar and said, well, there's no more than 3 weeks left in the season.
I don't know if he's going to play this year, Zach, but I wouldn't bet on it given their history.
Wow. That'd be something. You mentioned Ben Simmons, and He's someone right now, clearly no one respects his shot because he is unwilling to shoot the basketball. And ever since that Wizards game where they did that bump of Ben and put him to the free throw line intentionally, this guy does not want to go to the charity stripe. I have big expectations for him. I don't get on him like a lot of other people, but he needs to get that confidence back, and I don't know who the person is to get through to him on that.
I'm not sure either. I think, I talked to somebody with involved in the team earlier this season and asked him whether Simmons shooting was a matter of mental problems or something physically with his form. And this person said basically it was a combination of the two, that the form is off, and because the form is off, he misses more shots, and therefore his confidence sinks. That they were trying to work on his form and work on it. But there's working on it in practice, and then there's working on it in games, and there's a difference there. I mean, you can put a guy all by himself in the gym, and he can hit 9 out of 10 free throws with nobody else around. It's when it matters within a game, and he's being fouled on purpose so that team can send him to the line and hoping that he misses, and then he psychologically has to confront that fact that they are sending you to the line because they think you're going to miss. That is a different situation to deal with. And I'm with you. I want to see this kid. I think the kid has an incredible amount of talent and potential. I want to see him realize it, but I'm not sure we're going to see him realize it until he starts to develop that outside shot and develop more confidence with it.
There's 6 players on the Sixers injury report tonight. 4 of them are already ruled out. So Brett Brown doesn't have a lot of numbers, and it's been that way for a while. How do you evaluate the job of Brett Brown this year, Mike?
I think it's difficult to do so. I like Brett.
I agree.
I think he's a good basketball mind, and he's been a good front man for the organization. He's willing to take all the bullets. The problem with Brett's situation is that Brian Colangelo did not hire Brett. And as well as they might get along, most GMs want to bring in their own guy. And, I do know that Jerry Colangelo, Brian's father, and, still an advisor to Sixers ownership, has been keeping his eye on Jay Wright. I wrote this in a column last year.
Wow.
And, through their involvement with USA Basketball. And if the Sixers are as committed to good PR and marketing as they seem to be, to me, it makes some sense that they would pursue Jay Wright if this thing were to fall apart, if the team were to miss the playoffs and be a disappointment this season, if Brett is unable to get them out of this tailspin. I don't think they're going to fire Brett mid-season or anything like that. I'm not even sure they're contemplating it. But the season's got a long way to go, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. And as I said, Brian Colangelo did not hire Brett Brown, and that's a factor that does not go away. You have to take that into consideration at all times.
Would Jay be interested? I have to imagine he would be, right?
I think the circumstances would have to be right. I think there are certain NBA jobs that Jay Wright would be interested in. I think the Sixers would be one. I think the Lakers would be one. I think the Knicks or the Nets would be jobs he'd be interested in. The question is, are those jobs coming open? When are they coming open? Where is he at with his family? There are only so many places he'd be willing to go. I don't think he'd want to go coach the New Orleans, Hornets or the New Orleans Pelicans, I guess they're called now.
Yeah, the Pelicans.
They were the Hornets for a while. I don't think Jay would want to coach the Charlotte Hornets either. But I think if the right job came around, his interest would be piqued, and I think the Sixers are on that short list.
And then finally, last one with Mike Sielski from the Philadelphia Inquirer, who's been great with us on the David Lerner Associates hotline on the Zach Gelb Show. The Philadelphia Eagles, we know that they have potential to play good defense. For the majority of this season, they play good defense. Even with Carson Wentz going down, Nick Foles did a very nice job, an efficient job last week, and they could still run the football. Those 3 phases are going to have to continue to get better and better if they're going to want to win the Super Bowl. The defense is a big question mark with their last 3 performances. How much of a chance do you still give the Eagles of just getting to the big game in Minnesota this year?
I don't give them a great chance. I really don't. I wrote this today that Carson Wentz tore his ACL in Los Angeles. I was there for that, and I believe it now. He was the reason to really trust and believe that they were a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Right now, among the teams that would be in the NFC, they would probably have the worst quarterback. Again, no slight to Nick Foles, but that's just looking objectively at the landscape of playoff teams in the NFC, particularly given the way Case Keenum has played for the Vikings this season. And in terms of coaching, if you're going to go ahead, you're going to put Doug Peterson, as good as he's been this season, head-to-head with a guy like Sean Payton or even Pete Carroll or even Mike Zimmer, who's done a lot with relatively little during his time in Minnesota. That's at least a push with those guys, if not an advantage to the other team. And the thing about Wentz that made him so special is that his good influence filtered down to the rest of the team. It allowed them to let the Rams go up and down the field all over them for 3 quarters because he was doing the same thing to the Rams. They haven't had a game all season where Carson Wentz played just average or poorly, and they won anyway because of the other facets in their game. That has not happened. And I don't expect it to happen with Nick Foles at the helm, when you're not playing the New York Giants. So, is it possible they could get to the Super Bowl? Yeah, of course it's possible. Is it really likely, even as a number 1 seed? I don't see it.
It's scary. I said the same thing last week. The minute that Wentz went down, I made that argument. I said, yeah, it's still possible, but it's not likely. So we're in a lot of agreement. The one thing I'll just say, though, about Doug is now I actually have this great sense of confidence in Doug, which I did not have going into this year. Doug, to me, though, and I know talent has to do with it, and this is a more talented team than last year, but I feel really confident with the job that he's been able to do this year.
He's been terrific. He really has. He's exceeded any reasonable expectation you might have had for him as a head coach. But we're going to find out over these next couple of weeks and certainly in the playoffs what a Doug Peterson coach team that does not have Carson Wentz looks like. It looked pretty good against a really bad team in the Giants. But there's more evidence to be gathered.
Mike, great stuff. Happy holidays to you and your family. We appreciate it. Thank you.
You too, Zach. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Mike Sielski joining us right there on the David Lerner Associates hotline.